Thank you, Nancy. It's really wonderful to hear about all of the amazing progress you guys have been able to make in the Asia Pacific region, and I think that's very inspiring to those of us around the world, very much so. My name is Amanda Wheeler. I'm a working mom and a small business owner. I'm also a former smoker who could not break free of cigarettes even after surviving cancer at a young age and going through chemotherapy. Cancer was not enough to get me to quit smoking, but vaping was. That's why I'm very proud to lead on this issue and speak for our cause, especially if that helps shatter the stereotype that vapers are either oddball eccentrics or hypnotized teenagers. I'm also grateful to be here because this conference is exactly what open discourse and deliberation on public health science ought to be about. Ideas are presented and challenged. There's a wide variety of stakeholder voices. Policy proposals and ideas can be tested by the intellectual marketplace of public debate. I'm here to carry the voices of our many small business members in the United States and to support the countless consumers that rely on their help and guidance to quit smoking every day. But that spirit is not what is happening in the broader public conversation about vaping and tobacco harm reduction. Outside these halls, it is unaccountable, domineering institutions like the World Health Organization, the Food and Drug Administration, and Bloomberg philanthropies that dominate the discussion. We owe it to both consumers and to one another to speak out candidly about the suppression of public discourse that is taking place. By their every action and policy dictate, you can see a consensus among these powerful organizations to impose a prohibition regime on vaping and to shut down, intimidate, and criminalize anyone who dares to object. The WHO is on a global march to outlaw vaping, knowing it can strong-arm developing countries that depend on its resources. Just days ago, after WHO officials descended on Mexico to cajole its government ministers, that country criminalized all vaping products. Bloomberg Philanthropies works hand in glove with the WHO and shovels them tens of millions in annual funding. Bloomberg's fingerprints and front groups are visible in the prohibition schemes being decreed in every corner of the globe, including, most recently, a partnership that his front groups touted with human rights monster Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines. As of just a few weeks ago, the Food and Drug Administration in the US now has gained a comprehensive stranglehold on all vaping products of every type of nicotine in the United States. The agency routinely lavishes funding on pseudoscience to hype theoretical harms from vaping, while reflexively downplaying vaping as a smoking cessation method. They have denied millions of products from the market, while Bloomberg's front groups brag openly about their close rapport with the most senior FDA officials. And notice, please, that these groups don't seek to persuade. Their aim is to dictate and enforce. Although they may show up occasionally at conferences to mouth platitudes and pretend to take part, the real proof is in how they ostracize and disregard the very people who are the most negatively impacted by their policies. I invite you to take a casual look at the social media feeds of these organizations where they make their pronouncements to consumers and the public. There you will see an endless scroll of ordinary voices pleading with them for dialogue on both the science and their individual experiences of how vaping is helping people every day to quit smoking. But there is zero engagement. These groups never reply. They don't even attempt to offer meaningful acknowledgement. Forget about empathy or accountability. When he was asked about these public complaints in a recent interview, the new head of the FDA, Dr. Robert Califf, simply laughed. He declared, quote, "I'm 70 years old. I'm relatively impervious to critique. After surviving a harrowing confirmation process," he chuckled, "what are they going to do to me now?" And while he was on a comedic roll, Califf also added that he has a few quips about the public input. Quote, "The intensity of the heat emitted by what I call the Twitterati, people who like to comment on FDA decisions, is inversely proportional to the quality of the evidence. And like that, we are all dismissed." This is breathtaking arrogance from a public health official, and it ought to outrage every one of us. It reveals the actual undisguised attitude that our public health overlords have towards tobacco harm reduction. In their eyes, we are just the little people whose lives they can manipulate like tiny avatars in a video game, if they even think of us at all. My organization, the American Vapor Manufacturers Association, has written both Dr. Califf and his predecessors repeatedly, and we are routinely ignored. Dozens of the leading tobacco science thinkers have written Bloomberg asking for a private conversation about the latest research, and they too have been utterly rejected. Many of these same thinkers signed an open letter to the CDC chief, Rochelle Walensky, urging her to set the record straight on that the EVALI outbreak was not caused by nicotine vaping. But unsurprisingly, she said nothing and did even less. When FDA was granted sweeping control over all the remaining nicotine vaping in March, it was done with no public hearings, zero debate, and inserted as a midnight rider into a completely unrelated spending bill. Here's the worst part. Agencies like the FDA and CDC know better. FDA has been forced to admit that a handful of nicotine vaping products are, in their jargon, appropriate for the protection of the public health, precisely because the science shows they are vastly safer than cigarettes. But the FDA has done nothing to promote that life-saving message. And if I say to one of my customers that vaping is a great way to quit smoking, that same agency says that I'm violating the law. The CDC itself investigated the EVALI outbreak and found that it had absolutely zero connection with nicotine vaping. And yet they sit idle while the vast majority of Americans remain deceived by the agency's own misinformation. The one safeguard we are supposed to have against unaccountable power is the news media. But they are not merely failing in their duty, they are sucking up to the very people they are supposed to be scrutinizing and pushing clickbait scare stories that have vilified the most successful smoking cessation method ever devised. And I'm looking at CBS News, the Associated Press, Politico, the New York Times, among many others. They refuse to hold FDA or the CDC's feet to the fire, even as the public is being egregiously deceived. More than 70% of Americans now wrongly and falsely believe that nicotine vaping is as or more dangerous than smoking, a figure that has gotten worse in each of the last 5 years. Where are the stories on the countless people using flavored vaping products to quit cigarettes and how the FDA is stripping those products away from them? Where is the coverage of how vape shops that are helping marginalized communities to break free of cigarettes only to have their businesses crushed by arbitrary regulations? Where is the investigative reporting on how the most rabid vaping opponents in Congress are major investors in tobacco stocks? There was a time when a story about a maniacal multi-billionaire hijacking public health policy with bribes and deceit would have been a bullseye target for the press corps. But now that kind of reporting is completely absent, to the immense disgrace of journalism. So let's say it plainly. The activities that I am describing are corrupt, they are unethical. The prohibition policies that are being imposed on the public are actively causing immense harm. And that means that in the big picture, the period of prohibition arrogance we are in today will soon be remembered as one of the worst episodes of regulatory malpractice in modern history. And shame on us if we sit on our hands while this neo-prohibition scheme steamrolls the communities that are counting on us to lift their voices. I know that there are some here who have urged conciliation in this crucial public conversation, but that diplomacy requires a good faith dialogue, a two-way street that respects the input and dissent from all stakeholders. However, we are way past that point now, and it's plain to see that this prohibition is an absolutist posture. It thrives on hubris and moral certainty. It mocks critics, and it demeans individuals in favor of the collective. But everyday consumers don't need a history lesson. They can see with their own eyes how the prohibition juggernaut is crushing their right to switch to nicotine vaping and take charge of their own health destinies. Consumer groups like our friends at CASA in the US have gathered tens of thousands of those consumer testimonials. A common theme in nearly all of them is a hardening anger that their voices and their very lives are treated as irrelevant. Not a day goes by in my vape shops when senior citizens, soldiers, veterans, moms and dads, customers from every walk of life don't voice their indignation about how their own choices about their own lives are being stolen from them. The scientific case for tobacco harm reduction has been amply made at this conference and is well known to all of us here. What's more, we are talking about a fundamental human right to make our own lifestyle and healthcare choices. That's why my advice to advocates and consumers is let's speak up louder. Let's join arms with others facing the same challenge. No one, not a pope or a king or the New York Times or some unelected bureaucrat, has the right to control what I do with my own body. The only way those forces will succeed is with our obedience, and my answer to that is no. That is also why everyone here has the same moral duty to say once and for all that enough is enough. Thank you.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you very much for a truly inspiring presentation, Nancy, and a fascinating response, Amanda.